Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Kansas Junior Livestock Show Lead Challenge. My name is Brittney Grother, and I serve as the Lead Challenge Competition Coordinator. So thank you for joining us for the second Listen and Learn session. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items to go over with you. First of all, this is a Zoom webinar. So that means that you can hear and see the presenters, but they can't see or hear you. Therefore, if you would like to ask a question, please use the chat option at the bottom of the screen. So you can submit a question at any point during the session, and our presenters will do their best to answer your question at the end. And if it works out to work into the conversation, we'll do it then as well. Secondly, make sure you fill out the participation survey after each session to receive your participation points. So the participation survey will ask your name, your age division, and one question about what you learned today during the session. The survey links are located on the Junior Livestock Show website. So today's session is titled How to Respectfully Agree to Disagree. Our two panelists tonight are Emily Lehning and Amy Gross. Emily and Amy, can you please take a moment to introduce yourselves to the participants and describe to them what it means to you to be respectful?
Great. Amy, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm so excited to be here with everybody this evening. My name is Amy Gross, and I work with Dale Carnegie Training. And Dale Carnegie wrote a book a long time ago, 1936, older than your grandparents probably. And the book is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's still a bestseller. And so as you go off to college, it may be even a book that you might read sometime. And his daughter also wrote a book based on that. And it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People for the Teenage Girl. So if you are a young woman on this call, you might also benefit from that program or from that book. And I've been working with Dale Carnegie for about 7 years, and I work with professionals in agriculture, especially here in Kansas, and all businesses, banking and education, and really work with people, with adults, on how do we respectfully disagree, respectfully agree to disagree. How do we build trust with each other? It's all about those people skills. And I will say that having worked with Dale Carnegie for the last 7 years, I've actually gotten a lot better myself as an adult in being respectful and agreeing to disagree. And because you know what, that being respectful is so important in the work that we do in our families. And to me, what it really means is that I can understand that not everybody's like me. And that's okay. And it's not only just okay, it's actually really great because we learn from each other, and especially then just really trying to understand where people are coming from. And from that, we get a lot of learning. And at the base of that, the foundation of that is all about being respectful. So I look forward to talking with everybody this evening.
And hello, everyone. I'm Emily Lehning, and I'm a co-founder with Roots and Legacies Consulting. And we work with individuals and teams on all kinds of different ideas of growth and leadership development. And before I started this job, I worked at Kansas State University for around 20 years. And so I've worked with youth and college-age students for a long time. And one of the prompts that we had was to talk about what it means to be respectful. And I've been thinking about this for a few days now, and I wanted to try to boil it down because that's kind of a hard concept to think about what it means to be respectful. You kind of like know in your heart what that means, but how do you put it to words? And what I came up with was being respectful is honoring the humanness of the other person, recognizing that they're probably more like you than different than you if you really take the time to dig deep and get to know them. And I also thought it was this balance of knowing who you are and accepting who other people are and having humility to be able to open yourself up to the opinions of others and the experiences of others. So I really look forward to the conversation tonight and getting to know the questions that you might have about this big and interesting topic.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy and Emily. So to kick us off with our first official question, I will have you both describe a time when you had a conversation with someone you didn't agree with and how it made you feel. So whoever wants to start.
Yeah, go ahead, Emily. You can go first
Okay.
this time.
Yeah, I'll jump in and we can go back and forth. So in my previous job, I had a call from a mom who was upset that her daughter wasn't selected for an organization. And she presented her concern in that she felt like the process was unfair and that her daughter hadn't been given the opportunity to really show who she was through the process, and that we hadn't given her the space and the equal opportunity that other students in the process had. And that was really hard to hear because we were a group that prided ourselves in being fair and consistent and offering students this great opportunity to share about their experiences. So to hear the opposite of that from a perspective was really hard. And the mom was angry and sad, and I felt angry and sad. And, my first instinct was to rush and defend our process. And, recognizing that situation, it wasn't good for either of us to try to defend. It was more trying to find an understanding of each perspective and then finding ways that we both could inform each other, that I could learn from her daughter's experience and I could also share more about the experience that we had designed and created and the reason behind how we had structured things. In the end, it was a productive call, but it didn't really start out that way because it really felt like we were on very different sides and we both had these strong emotions in that moment. And so it took some time, but I feel like we ended the call in a good place.
Yeah, and so I had to really think about this, and there was a time not too long ago where I was going to dinner with some family, and some of the guys had on baseball caps, and we were going to a restaurant. And I was always taught by my mom that when we go to eat or go to dinner, that you always take your hat off. And so, and because these were family, I just said, "Hey, are you guys going to take your hat off?" And they got kind of really mad and were offended that I would even suggest that, because it was something that they were used to doing, and it wasn't my immediate family; it was kind of extended family. So, some cousins and so further kind of down the line. And we kind of got into not a really bad argument, but it was a little uncomfortable because something that was important to me was just kind of normal for them. And so I remember talking to them and just saying, well, my mom, she was actually a home extension agent when she was working before she had her family. And so learning about table etiquette and just common courtesy was something that was just really important to her to teach to us. And because that was a lesson from my mom, it just was really personal to me. And so once I explained that to them, they understood that. They understood it. And they also explained to me that they were a little embarrassed to take off their hats because they were afraid they were going to have hat head and that they wouldn't look so well. And one guy had just been to a dermatologist appointment. So he had some scabs on his head. So he was kind of using that, and so what it came down to is that, while that was important to me, it wasn't as important to them. And it was a casual restaurant. And so we really came to a point of agreeing to disagree. And I came to respect that the reasons for why they wanted to keep their cap on. But it was just kind of an interesting thing to realize that something which might seem so small was really important to me. And so I think that's how it kind of made me feel, was like almost they were being disrespectful to my mom. And so then that kind of was disrespectful to me. But then what I also realized later was that, you know, I really needed to see things from their perspective too. And bottom line, you know, what's most important is that we got along and had a good meal together.
Okay, thank you both. I'm going to start with Amy for this next question. What can you do to keep a disagreement from getting personal?
Yeah, that's a hard question, right? Because like I just explained kind of in my example, it felt really personal, right? It felt personal because it was something that was important to me. It was a lesson from my mom that was important, something that I've tried to, you know, share with my family. But then to make it less personal, what we really need to do is to think about, where does a person's opinion come from? And our opinions are not necessarily about who we are. And so when we're disagreeing, we need to kind of separate the good in the person, because there's always something good in somebody, versus what we're disagreeing about. And so a lot of times what I say to people is, when we get personal, it's like it's hitting our emotional heart. It's hitting our emotional kind of, we feel it in our gut sometimes. But to keep it from getting personal, we have to take that step back and use our brains, and instead start thinking about, you know, what is this issue really about? And then start to think from a more rational kind of perspective. A lot of, there's some tools or some techniques to do this. The first one is to stop talking and start listening. So change our perspective. And when we listen, our intention is, and this is one of Dale Carnegie's principles that he writes about in his book, is try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view, right? To try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. And when we do that, then it becomes more about understanding the other person and less about us. And thinking about it, it's about our ideas and less about the person. So that's just one idea about keeping that disagreement from getting personal, is to use our heads and our brains and less about the emotion. Another tip, and this one comes from my mom too, is she would always say, always take the high road. So if someone else, so we can't control what anybody else is saying or doing. So if we're in a disagreement and we see the other person is making it personal, then it's our opportunity to be a leader and to take the high road, which means don't make it personal back, but try to understand things from their point of view.
Emily, is there anything that you want to add on that question?
I just think Amy did such a beautiful job of explaining that and offering some techniques that we can use. And, you know, what a gift as an elementary, middle, or high schooler to understand and know some of those techniques and be able to practice now, because those are things that adults use every day, to be able to remember to listen in those moments and to take that step back and use our brains to think about our emotions before we might automatically jump in and react to what's happening in the situation. So I think that's beautiful techniques that can be applied so easily. You know, it got me thinking a little bit about, I had a motivational speaker I heard long ago at an FFA conference, and he talked about the difference between a thermostat and a thermometer. So when Amy was talking about her mom's advice of taking the high road, it made me think back to that as a leader, when we're in a space, are we the thermometer that's reading the temperature of the room, or are we the thermostat setting the temperature of the room? So thinking about how we could position ourselves to maybe be the one to take the high road and step back and not, add more emotion to a situation or personally attack someone in that situation, but we might be able to take the step back and find a way to calm the waters or to listen more than we speak. So I thought Amy did such a nice job of framing that up for us.
Great, thank you. Okay, Emily, I'm going to start with you for this next question. How do you avoid putting down the other person's ideas and beliefs? So how do you avoid putting down the other person's ideas and beliefs?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And it goes back to our first comment about respect. And, I think we've been taught a lot about the golden rule, the idea of treating others how we'd want to be treated. And I had a professor in grad school who would talk about the platinum rule, that we would treat people better than we would want to be treated. And that always just stuck with me as something to think about when I'm around others, that give people the respect that you would hope to receive in return. And it never feels good to have your ideas discounted or your beliefs attacked. Those are things that are personal and held as sacred. It's part of what Amy talked about, that closeness, that heart of who we are. And so if we know that that doesn't feel good on the receiving end, then it certainly makes sense that we would try to avoid giving that out. And we know that if we can put more good in the world, that's probably a better thing. And what I found is when people have ideas that maybe we don't agree with or we feel are off base, it may be that they don't have the same information that we might have. I mean, if we think about the world of animal agriculture, and many of the people on this webinar probably work very closely with that day to day, they consider it part of their family's livelihood. It's deeply personal because of all the care and attention and time that we put into it. So if someone were to, attack that, to say negative things about that, that would feel very hurtful. And it may at the same time be an opportunity to understand where that person is coming from, as Amy mentioned earlier, to really get a sense of, what's behind that? Where is that belief tied? And then maybe there's an opportunity for educating them, providing them with information, or providing them with a new way, a new perspective to view what's going on in that situation. And then they may be able to reshape their ideas moving forward.
Yeah, and as you were talking, Emily, it reminded me actually just today at lunch, I was taking a minute to read and reread that book that I had mentioned, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And the first chapter is Dale Carnegie's first human relation principle. And the principle is don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And that just, as I just reread this question that how do we avoid putting other people's ideas and beliefs? How do we avoid doing that? We avoid that by really living that principle. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Because what Dale Carnegie said and what he wrote in his book was that as soon as we criticize or complain about somebody or condemn their thinking, all they're going to do is get defensive. And once they get defensive, he says, people rarely then admit that they've done something wrong. And so rather than we just don't, all we do is end up in an argument. So finding other ways to, again, it comes down to that being respectful and not putting people down.
Great answers on that one too. Our next question, I'm going to start with Amy, is what are some ways you can be a good listener?
Yeah, so there are. So listening is actually a skill. And with all skills, we can learn it and we can get better at it. And so when we think about listening, we usually think, well, we listen with our ears. That's not all. We also listen with our eyes and we listen with our heart. So with our eyes, one good way to help us improve our listening is to actually make eye contact. And it also really helps if we use non-verbals as we are listening. That helps us stay connected. It also helps if in our heart, right? Our heart comes to where we actually want to listen. We have to want to hear what the other person says. And one of the things that I work with our adults with, and I tell you what, if as young adults in high school and elementary school and middle school, if you can practice this and master it, you're a step ahead of so many adults. But what we really focus on is not listening to speak, not listening to respond, but instead think about listening to understand. So that means that we're really quiet, not just with our mouth, but we're also quiet in our brain. So we keep our brain quiet. We're not thinking about what we're going to say next. We're thinking about how are we going to really respond. So those are just a couple of things to keep in mind, and we can check ourselves. Am I actually listening? Am I listening so I can actually repeat what I've just heard? Or am I listening and actually I'm talking in my head? They just can't hear me. So those are a couple of things to kind of that we can practice and check ourselves when we are supposed to be listening. But what's really happening? Are we thinking about what they're saying, or are we thinking about what we're going to say?
And Amy, I think that's really incredible. And in a world where we can be so distracted, it's really hard to keep in mind those listening skills between our gadgets and all of the things that draw on our attention. It is a true act of discipline to push pause and to give our full attention to the person in front of us and to really listen with all of our senses. So we're sure that we're tuning into that person and what they're not only saying, but what they're emoting, what their body language may be telling us about how they're feeling about the topic and how we might be able to connect with them more fully. So I love that.
Great. So Emily, I will start the next question off with you. What are some ways to keep a conversation on track and remain calm?
Yeah, great question. So, I think Amy gave such a great suggestion of being able to take a step back and think about our emotions and our reactions. I think there are times where maybe our first reaction is to react. And so we might not be in that space where we're thinking about how we want to be in the space and how we want to connect with the person in front of us. There also may be a place where we feel like we know we need to be in control, so we almost come off as robotic because we're trying to be so structured and in control and not happy, sad, or any of the emotions that we could be. But there's this real maturity that comes when we can understand that we can change our emotions by thinking about where we are and how we want to be. And so some advice that I was given and some skill building, I had this great professor, a different professor, that to be in the space and to keep the conversation on track and be calm is to give the other person a chance to get out all of their emotions. So if someone is speaking with you and they're very, animated and high emotion, let them get that all out. And you might use some phrases like, thanks for sharing that with me. What else do you think about this topic? Or what else is on your mind? And you really just let them get that all out. And then you have in front of you everything that the person may be thinking about the topic, and they've also had a chance to expend a lot of that energy. So then you both can come at it a little more calmly. And I just thought that was a beautiful way to be present and to really let the first person have the floor and to show that you're open to what they're thinking about the topic. And then to ask another question to say, thank you for sharing all of that with me. Would you be interested in hearing my thoughts on the topic? And then when they say yes, that's permission for you to go ahead and share. And that, again, can kind of keep the topic on track. And it also lets that person give the verbal commitment that they would give you the same courtesy of being able to share your thoughts on a topic. I've tried that a few times, especially in instances where someone may be very upset or concerned about a situation. I've really kind of let them get everything out. And then I felt like we sort of started at the same place, and then we could be calm and we could all think more clearly about what we wanted to do moving forward.
Yeah. And and I don't know what you think about this, Emily, but one thought came to mind is that sometimes if we're really finding ourselves kind of losing our calm, right? If we feel ourselves getting upset, it might be okay just to say, hey, time out, time out. I need a minute. I'm going to go get a drink of water. I'm going to go to the restroom, and then get yourself some space to become calm again, so that you can, kind of show up as that leader, show up as somebody who is calm and collected. If we find that the other person is getting upset, we might just say, hey, let's take a time out. Let's just take a step back, and let's give ourselves 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And then let's come back and try again. So sometimes, and that's okay sometimes, to just say, time out. I need a break. I need to step back and gain my composure.
I think that's beautiful. And to give people that permission to just take a step back and reset, it does give you the brain a chance to kind of catch up with maybe what's coming out of our mouth and gives us a chance to have that reset moment. And I think when you do return, people's mindset's in a different place, and it can be a lot more productive.
Yeah.
Great. So Amy, I know you talked about taking a time out. Our next question is, how do you know when it is time to move on?
Yeah. And that can be tricky, right? That can be tricky, especially if we feel sometimes like the other person maybe isn't listening, or maybe the other person isn't, right? Because we can do all of the things right. We can do all the things right, but the other person might not. And so to me, I guess for me, when I know it's time to move on is when we need to move on before things either escalate, right? Because sometimes we don't want things to get too out of hand. And so sometimes, as long as we feel like, okay, I've heard your story, and maybe we just decide, you know what, this isn't going to be worth even getting into an argument about it, or even to, it's hard to know. And so I think when we feel like that, if the emotions are going to get too strong, then that might be the time to just say, okay, we're done. Or it can also be after we've at least had a chance to just say, I appreciate your perspective. A lot of people feel that way. I just want you to know that I have a different opinion, and here's why. And so just thank you for listening. And now let's go out and play. Or now, let's go get a hamburger. And moving on to stay focused on the good part of the person, right? The person that we still want to hang out with or do something with. So a couple of ideas.
Yeah, just a couple of things to add. I think there's even the pause in some ways that we were talking about in the previous question can be a way to move on. You can push pause and then come back to the conversation, and that may feel like a moment of closure, right? Like you've reached the point. I like Amy's comment about, I've heard your perspective, I've had a chance to share mine. I feel like we're in a place where we know where each other stands, and we might not be perfectly aligned, but at least we respected each other enough to share where we both stand. Now let's go do this thing together that we enjoy, or let's go move on to the next thing that we want to focus on. So I think there'll be something inside of you that knows, and it's really hard to describe exactly what that would be, but there's this feeling inside that that you've shared what you needed to share as part of your story, or the information that you really wanted to share to the other person. And the hard part is, it's not like a debate where there's an end, where someone calls it. It's not like a game where there's the end of the half or the quarter. It's not like there's an even number of points or counterpoints that each side gets to do, but it's more fluid, and it's more how you feel and how you want to preserve the relationship with that person that you're visiting with. So it's something that you develop over time, and it's also something you can talk to trusted people in your life about. So if you have a parent or a coach or a teacher that you can say, I'm not really seeing eye to eye with this person, and I'm trying to figure out how to move forward. They can offer you some really great tips, and they may be able to tell you when a pause or a time to move on makes the most sense, just as you build up that sense in yourself about what that can look like.
Yeah, and as you were talking, Emily, it made me think about, when I'm working with adults, even we talk about when we're having a conversation, we want to end our conversation. It's like we want to have a win-win, right? Like both people are winning. We know when to walk away if we feel like we're getting to a position or the other person is really pushing because they want to disagree because they want to win and we want the other person to lose, right? So we want to walk away if we start feeling, or it's a good time to stop if we start feeling like somebody needs to win, right? Because that's part of agreeing to disagree, is that we don't want somebody to lose. It's respectful. So both people coming out it's going to be a win-win because we both still feel okay that there's a lot of opinions out there and we can learn from each other and we can learn to understand where somebody's coming from. So that's kind of a good time to know when to move on, is if it feels like somebody needs to feel like they want to win, and that very well could be us. But once we're doing that, now we're getting away from this whole idea of respectfully agreeing to disagree.
Okay, our next question, I'm going to start with Emily, is social media as a popular media for advocacy efforts. Do you have any specific tips to managing a conversation in the comment section?
Oh, social media is so tough. And I think what makes it tough is there's something that feels protected about social media, where people may say things that they would never say if they were face to face with someone. And so the chance for a conversation or a thread on a post to escalate can really, that those chances can be high. And, my advice is to think carefully about what you post, to think about the respect that that you would have if the person were standing right in front of you, to honor the humanness in that person, even though you're talking through machines. And, the other thing would be to use information and use facts that you can point to as you help share your point. So you may have a perspective or a point, but if there's a way that you can add to that with facts or links to articles, that can be really helpful in keeping the dialogue, fact-based and positive rather than personal and, attacking someone's beliefs or ideas like we had talked about before. I thought there was a great example during the pandemic. KDA, the Kansas Department of Agriculture, they were on some of the forums as I was watching people post about some of the disruption in the food chain. And, I thought there was such a really positive and productive tone and informative, where people were really, kind of fired up about the way things were going and wanting to point blame and place blame. And I really felt like the people that were posting on behalf of KDA were really, they were clear, and they were calm, and they were informational. And I thought that went a long way to de-escalate some of the emotion that was coming through in some of those posts.
Yeah, and Emily, I would add that really be cautious. And if you feel like you need to kind of state an opinion on social media, check with your parents, check with your teachers, and really use that guidance, because I would say 9 out of 10 times, for me, the best option is to not engage in those kinds of debates and things in social media. And I really appreciated what Emily said, is keep it clear, calm, and informative. So if you can provide a link to other information, because then we stay away from this is my opinion, and we give the why. We give the reasons why. That's the information part of it. And I think it's just really important to really be in sync and consistent with what our parents would want us to do and what our teachers would want us to do too, kind of those people that we really respect.
You know, I was thinking when I was growing up, this was pre social media, if that helps anyone, and you all may be thinking dinosaur here, but my parents would say, write a letter, put it in a drawer, and if you still want to send it the next day after you had cooled off, that, you know, and rarely did I write the letter, because I would kind of be like, if I'm to the point of writing the letter, I probably just need to think about it overnight and then think about it again in the morning. But rarely was a letter ever sent, right? So it sometimes in the moment, it feels like you have this very important thing to say. And then after you reflect on it, you think, maybe it's not so important that I say it or say it in that venue. There may be another way to communicate that idea.
Yeah.
So, Amy's advice about connecting with someone and kind of test out those ideas to see if it's even a good idea to post on that thread, so valuable. It's like the modern day version of write the letter and put it in the drawer.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what we do. We do that a lot with the people that I work with too. And some of my friends is we'll ask each other, we'll talk to somebody about it first. And it's like, well, do you think I should send this? Do you think I should say this? And so again, that's taking that step back and thinking with our head and not with our emotion. And so it's taking that step back. So if we're feeling emotional about it, if we're feeling angry or upset, it's probably best not to do it.
Thank you both. I have our last scripted question, and then we'll go to the chat if any of our participants have any questions for you. So our last scripted question for both of you is, how does it benefit you to know how to have a respectful conversation?
So I just the first thing that comes to my mind is the benefit to me is that people see me as a leader, right? And if we show respect, then we get respect back. And to me, that is, and it feels good, right? So when we are having that respectful conversation, when we're leading in that way, we're being a role model for others and really showing them how to do it. And it takes some practice. And it's keep practicing. But that's one of the benefits to me is that I'm seen as a leader and I get that respect back.
I echo everything Amy said, and it's just much more enjoyable to have positive relationships and to have positive connections with people, even though you may not be fully aligned on every issue. That breadth and depth of relationships that you can build with people, and those differences can sometimes be the strength in your network, to know people who maybe believe something different than you or are positioned differently on issues. And as Amy said, it does make you a leader. Being calm and confident in situations that can be highly emotional is one of the most valued assets you can have. To know that you're someone who's going to have a clear head when decisions need to be made, and that you can listen to opinions that are different than you around you will make your decision making better. And so, yeah, I think that it's a much better way to live, and it's a much better way to lead.
Thank you both. I see we have one question in the chat from a little bit earlier. Quinn asked, did you ever get into fights with siblings? So how do you be respectful in those situations? That's pulling in the personal feelings, the beliefs, everything.
Yeah, Emily, I don't know about you, but I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. So there are 5 of us, and we are all about just 1 year apart in age. So yes, we got into fights and arguments. And so I've got a couple of things to kind of, as I reflect back on when I was young, some strategies that I used, and now that we're adults, how some of those things have changed. So as a kid, what I remember, and I wasn't always good at this, I wasn't always consistent, but this is what this is what I remember, especially with my brother. And with my brother, it was both verbal argumenting, and and we would also wrestle a little bit, right? He would kind of throw you down on the ground and sit on you, like siblings do. And what I found is that if I didn't fight back, if I just didn't engage in the argument, then it wasn't any fun for them. And so when I just kind of said, I know you're, in my head, I'm thinking, I know you're upset. I know this is, but if I just wouldn't engage in it, then it de-escalated, and it didn't become any fun. So that's one thing that I remember from being a kid is, again, like my mom would say, take the high road. And now that we're grown up, we still are very strong personalities, and thankfully we agree on much more than what we disagree about. But when we do have those disagreements now, and we find sometimes that the emotion gets in, if we take that step back and just say, okay, yep, we don't agree on this, and just respect that, you know what, they can live their life the way that they want to. It doesn't have to be just like mine. Because I know that at our heart, we have the same values. We love each other. We love our family. And that's what's most important at the end of the day. How about you, Emily?
Yeah, I have one older brother. He was 4.5 years older. So I was the annoying tag-along sibling, and probably the one that needed to be ignored. And so that was a very successful strategy in our household. So my brother would know when I was being super annoying, or when he would get under my skin a little bit. And so we would kind of go to our separate corners, right? We'd kind of each go and do our own thing. And I think that was really successful because, if I was annoying him, then he wasn't giving me the reaction and the attention that I was trying to get as the tag along. And so I think that was a good strategy. As adults, like growing up, I like what Amy said about just this idea that we don't have to live the same kind of lives, and to keep our eye on what's important, those values and those things that are central to our lives, and those things on which we'll always agree. And another thing that I think sometimes is, is the thing that's bothering me right now going to bother me in a year or 5 years? Or is it something that's more temporary, and it's just maybe something that it's not a fundamental difference, it's maybe just a difference of temporary opinion that isn't going to really fundamentally change our lives. And if it's not that important that I'm going to be thinking about it in a year, then it's probably okay for me to let it go in this short run. And also, I think what we talked about earlier, remembering what we love most about the person that we're interacting with, whether that's a friend or a sibling or a coworker down the line. And some of you are probably already working part-time jobs, or you're working on your family's farm, and remembering the thing that you love the most about the person and keeping that central. A lot of this other stuff is really, in the big picture, not that important.
Yeah. And I see the follow-up question of how can you stay out of arguments with them if they are annoying? Oh, and I can relate to that. And here's something that I wish I would have learned when I was like your age. But one of the things that I've learned through my work with Dale Carnegie is that we cannot change the other person. We cannot change that they might be annoying. All we can do is change how we react. That's all we can do. So some things to keep in mind is that, if the other person is being annoying, what we can do is we can change the situation. So we can move to a different room. We can express to that person, hey, and this is hard, this might be hard. Hey, I really love you. You're my sibling. Or I know that this is something you want to do, but I need to ask you, could you please stop? And they still might not. And then, you know what? We just have to, that's kind of what I would do with my brother, is I found that if I didn't react, then it wasn't any fun to be annoying anymore. Because they sometimes people will annoy us because they try to get us, right? They want us to react. So if we can stay calm, take that step back, sometimes we might have to move to another room or, put our earphones on and listen to some music. And if we can stay calm and be a leader and demonstrate to our siblings that, hey, this is not how I want to act with you. I want to be friends. I want to get along. And so we have to be role models in how to do that.
Okay, are there any other last minute questions for the chat? Okay, well, I want to take a moment to thank Amy and Emily so much for taking time out of their evenings to talk to us tonight. Whether you're listening to this live or watching it recorded, I hope that you enjoyed tonight's session and got a lot of information out of it on how to respectfully agree to disagree and apply those learnings to your life. Starting tomorrow if you wanted to, or starting tonight. I mean, your siblings could be in the house and you might need to apply some of these things you learned tonight. So again, thank you both for taking time tonight to speak to everybody. I want to go over a couple housekeeping rules before we log off for the night. So please remember to sign up for a prepared speech and career mock job interview date and time using the links sent via email and posted on the Junior Livestock Show website. Don't forget to fill out your participation survey after watching tonight's session so you can get your participation points. And make sure to join us next week for the third session titled From Farm to Fork, Why Responsible Animal Care Matters. So thank you and have a good rest of your evening.